I think the pivotal moment in the modern history of IRL was the 2 days of meetings we had in the middle of 2023, a couple of months after France 2025 collapsed. That was a seminal moment. It was the opportunity for us to reset, look at how we'd done things in the past, because there was a broad agreement from many people involved in the sport that the model of the World Cups that we had run until then wasn't fit for purpose.
This special episode is an interview with Danny Kazandijan, the Secretary-General of the International Rugby League. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who knows more about the IRL than Danny. Before we get started, I'd like to apologise for the echo that's present when Stu and I are asking our questions.
We can get more national teams if we want and split the number of players up and use heritage players and get any number of national teams that we want in the World Cup. That is not growing the sport.
Danny, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on, mate. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Keith. Thanks for the welcome and the invitation.
No problem. And as always, we've got Stu. Stu, you keeping well?
I'm keeping very well, thanks, Keith. And again, excited to have another International Rugby League guest on our podcast. Danny, it's great to have you on the podcast at this time of year when International Rugby League really ramps up around this time, so that's great. First of all, though, can you just tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to love our sport?
Yeah, I'm from London, which most listeners will know is not, well, when I was growing up, was not really a rugby league area, still not a rugby league area. I was a big rugby union fan, but I always admired rugby league. We used to get it in the south on BBC for Challenge Cup games. And I remember my first ever sight of rugby league was Des Drummond running down the wing on a Challenge Cup game. So I always respected it and appreciated it. We used to get the kangaroo tours as well, so they used to be a big highlight. But the real instigator for what became a lifelong passion was the 1991 Origin series. My friend and I were waiting to watch a game of football. He was Welsh, it was Wales versus Germany, and it got bumped by Sky TV for some reason. And they replaced it with 91 Origin. And it was, figuratively speaking, jaw-dropping. Right, that type of speed, intensity, skill, ferocity, tackling was just like nothing we'd ever seen before. And I just became more and more intrigued by it. Asked my school sports teacher, my rugby coach, why don't we play rugby league, sir? It's much better than rugby union. And he said, don't talk to me about that rubbish sport. And that really surprised me. I'm like, why did he have such a violent reaction? And because naturally I'm inquisitive historian, I guess, by nature. That's my intrinsic personality. So I wanted to find out more about the sport, and then found out in the mid-90s about the issues, about the history of the sport, and just became an advocate for it, and ended up playing just for the Alliance team at London Broncos, and just been in love with the sport since the late 80s, early 90s, really. Paul Hoff will always be a legendary player for me, because I remember in the first Origin, Paul Hoff's game was stunning. The amount of try-saving situations he was involved in and defence-clearing runs were incredible. So I always take my hat off and salute Paul Hoff.
Yep, I'll have to look him up.
You're a Queensland man. Are you a Queensland man then, Danny?
No, absolutely not. Whenever I watch, I've got a rule with rugby league in my professional and personal life, that every match I watch, every decision I take, I think of what is in the best interest of rugby league. And that usually means, when you're watching a game, the underdog, unless it's France. And I think France has got one of the biggest strategic factors of potency for us as a sport. So, sorry, Stuart, I was supporting France against Greece during the World Cup. Yeah, I'm certainly neutral when it comes to most matches, and prefer the underdog to win.
Love that. You moved to Lebanon to build the sport in the region back in the early 2000s. What prompted that? Are there any legacies from that time?
Oh, yeah, loads of legacies. It's a very, very long and interesting story, but I'll keep it extremely succinct. I was working in the media in London, in the sports media, and I had an epiphany that I was late 20s, and I thought, right, I really got to do something meaningful with my life now, because I enjoy it, but I want to do something meaningful. And the most important thing in my life was rugby league, outside of family, etc. And I had got to know the Lebanese team in the 2000 World Cup, because my dad's Armenian, but he was raised in Lebanon, so there was a link there. He actually met my mum, who used to work for the United Nations, in Beirut, and they got married as a result of their time in Beirut. And so when the Lebanese team came over, I was working in the media. I got to know the Elias brothers, and we maintained our relationship with each other, because they're all established in Australia with jobs and with families. No one was really going to go out to Lebanon, which was kind of the agreement between the Lebanese Olympic Committee and the Cedars, let's call them the Cedars at the time, to start a competition in Lebanon. But because of their circumstances, no one was really going to do that. So I called them and said, right, I'm prepared to do it. I want to go out there. And I met with Taz Baitieri, actually in a hotel in Leeds during the 2001 Kangaroo Tour. Had lunch with Taz, discussed how he can give me a mandate. He was very clear there's no money to support the initiative, which I understood, didn't want. I was a freelance writer, so I could support myself. I went out on a fact-finding mission, really quite quickly landed on a strategy, which was to base it around universities, around institutions, because they were stable. They had players, they had young men, they had administrations, they had budgets, they had facilities, and they were relatively protected from the more difficult sides of Lebanese culture and society, if you will. And then to get to the end of the story, that's how we started. But the legacy is that we managed to set up the legal framework of the sport in Lebanon. So you'll know that it's a member of the sports ministry. It is a full part of the Lebanese sports infrastructure. It has received, not recently, but it has received many times taxpayers' funding from the sports ministry. So that's the biggest legacy, like the elections and the transfers of power all under the sports ministry regulations. So while times are difficult in Lebanon, and there has been a number of difficult episodes in Lebanese rugby league's history, there's always been really stable legal clubs that have managed to process the elections. And I would also say that we, in my 8 years there, we created a rugby league economy, not just individuals chipping in money to keep the sport going, but we had big institutions who were spending a lot of money on the sport over time. We had the biggest sports retailer called Mike Sport that was not only selling rugby league gear through its stores, but also to the big institutions and individuals. So there was a real, it was small, but it was a really profound rugby league culture that we created. And you can see that continues today because of the people who are leading the sport. They were all people like the president he came to the second ever training session of rugby league in Lebanon from AUB. The chief exec, he was at the first ever training session of Lebanese rugby league at Lebanese American University. So I would say they're the main three legacies: the legal framework, the rugby league economy that is still acting, and also, most importantly, the people who have got this culture of rugby league. It's not something that they were flirting with. It became a really important part of their life, and there are a lot of them.
That's incredibly impressive and really interesting as well, Danny, that you went and did something like that. That's just amazing. Moving on, your stint as general manager at the European Rugby League was a time of lots of activity and growth. Were they exciting times for the sport for you?
Yeah, look, every day that I'm in the sport, I'm excited by it, and it's a massive privilege to do what I do. I don't want to sound holier than thou, but I consider that every day I'm here to serve the sport. I want to push the sport's boundaries and interests, and I know that type of sentiment is shared by millions of people around the world. Passion is a an overused adjective in sport, but I think in addition to passion, rugby league engenders this extraordinary loyalty amongst its advocates and fans, and I certainly count myself in that group. But yeah, I joined the European Federation first as the Euro Med director in 2008 because Richard Lewis at the time had seen that we were starting to make a lot of progress, and he wanted to keep me involved and broaden my involvement. And when Kevin Rudd, who was the first general manager, if you like, under a different title, he left in 2010, and I interviewed and was lucky enough to receive the job. And my working context completely changed. In Lebanon, what I said, even though it was part of a federation, because I was the full-time expert administrative leader, what I said basically went. And I had a very supportive board with some very impressive individuals in Lebanon. But when I came to the RLEF, I was under a more orthodox governance structure with oversight from a very formal board and one of the most successful modern British sports administrators in Richard Lewis. So it was a time of rapid growth, Stuart, as you'll know. The organisation had never had a strategy before 2010. So the first task that I set myself with was a strategy, an 8-year strategy. And that was really built around just embedding the culture of the sport through increasing the amount of players, increasing the amount of clubs, increasing the amount of competitions, and increasing the amount of time that people were actually having their hands on the ball and playing rugby league. Because my belief was and still is that our sport just needs to get more domestic championships for longer periods of the year. So people are at training. When people are at training, they're thinking about going to training. They're talking about rugby league. They're getting that spirit with their teammates. Then they're thinking about the match. They're going to the match. They're playing the match. All of that inspires this growth of a rugby league culture. And without that, our sport, no mass participation sport, will succeed. And when I came to the European Federation, we had a number of examples where people in Europe were flirting with the sport. So a lot of rugby union clubs that were playing 2 or 3 games, and national federations would say, yeah, we've got 20 clubs. But what does that really mean? If they are not real rugby league clubs with real rugby league people who are dedicating themselves and their club to the sport, I would suggest that some, not all, but some wouldn't have longevity. And so that was what I set myself to. We didn't have much resources, but we managed to get resources mainly from the public sector. But it was a really exciting time. And I think you can see the legacy is that there's a lot more plurality in European Rugby League now, a lot more democracy, a lot more stability. And now we need to go on to the next phase, which is more championships, more government funding, and just more growth, all of those key metrics.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Actually, the government funding is kind of part of my next question. I remember that you guys received a fair amount of funding at the time from the European Union to educate coaches and match officials. Is that still happening? Have you had similar grants in other parts of the world?
Unfortunately, it's not happening. I know that the European Federation does have the capacity to stay in contact with the European Union. We switched to the European Union because when I joined, one of the first, successes that I had was getting Alitalia as a sponsor. And I don't know if you'll remember, but there was a bit of a debacle between the 2010 and the 2012 European Championships, European Cup as it was back then. Alitalia was so enamoured with their participation in the tournament in 2010 that they doubled their sponsorship. But then we, as a sport, and this is a microcosm of the sport, we broke contract with Alitalia because the European Federation, the RFL, French Federation, Wales Rugby League, they decided that France, Wales and England would play in a small triangular tournament before the 2013 World Cup. And so Alitalia said, well, this is not what we signed up to. We had England Knights in the competition. So based on that experience, I felt that from a purely traditional commercial point of view, selling the rights to a big competition, we probably weren't there yet as an organisation, but we didn't have a really stable competition to be able to take to market. So then I decided that the next most likely source of serious funding was the public administrations, and that was the European Union. So we had a lot of meetings with them. We managed to get, I think we applied for 6 and were successful in 5 applications. Total amount of income we got was around, I think, just under 900,000 euros for governance projects and for technical education projects. The most recent one was the biggest one. It was just under €500,000, which was, we won it in 2015, and it was between 2016 and 2018. The project, but I know there was some issue with the reporting of that project by my successor as general manager. So now European Federation, as England, where it's headquartered, is not an EU country anymore. It's looking to move its base, and when it does that, it will seek new projects through the European Union.
Yeah, okay. It leads us into my next question. We all know that funding is obviously a key issue in developing rugby league across the world. I mean, it's, if not the biggest, it's very close to it. You mentioned the Alitalia sponsorship. Are there other avenues to secure sponsorship for International Rugby League, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. This is, I mean, IRL in many names has been around since 1948. Do you two know how many sponsors it's had?
0. Is it a trick question?
Yeah, it is. Zero. The World Cups have had many sponsors, but IRL has never had a sponsor. So I was hired in 2018, not in my current role. I was hired as operations manager to provide structure to the organisation, turn it into a true IF, make it robust. My current role that I took over at the end of 2020 was different. Secretary General role, the head of the administration, had to start thinking about how we actually grow the organisation. I think the pivotal moment in the modern history of IRL was the 2 days of meetings we had in the middle of 2023, a couple of months after France 2025 collapsed. That was a seminal moment. It was the opportunity for us to reset, look at how we'd done things in the past, because there was a broad agreement from many people involved in the sport that the model of the World Cups that we had run until then wasn't fit for purpose. And I totally agreed with that. So we came up with a proposal to the board, which was based around tripling our revenue streams from the old model with one revenue stream, a rights fee. And there was only a guaranteed rights fee since 2017. Before that, there was no guaranteed rights fee. The 2013 World Cup was successful, but it was a case of whatever it makes goes to the IRL, and there was no certainty about what it would make. So the guaranteed rights fee is one source of revenue, but we wanted to diversify that revenue, because when something like COVID happens, if you've only got one source of revenue at one time in the year and you're dependent on that, that is objectively bad business practice. So we put in a proposal to the board that we would lower the guaranteed rights fee, but the host of the World Cups would only get local rights, local broadcasting rights, and local sponsorship rights. IRL would retain global rights. So the idea there is that over time, we'll be able to get long-term partners who aren't just around for 6 weeks, because there's not much value for a sponsor to activate a partnership in a small window, a 6-week World Cup period. We wanted the Adidas type sponsor who's been with FIFA for more than 70 years. Sponsors who know what our calendar looks like many years into the future, and has comfort that we will be implementing a calendar and producing content of a high quality that's highly visible. The other key element of the plan, and I think it's been misinterpreted by some commentators on social media especially, is about reducing the size of the World Cups and splitting them up. Having 3 World Cups in one is great for visibility and the diversity and inclusivity message. Who can do it other than Australia, that has got the capital to do it? The budget for the French World Cup with 4 tournaments was over €50 million. There are not many rugby league countries that will even contemplate that, because to do something like that, you need public authority funding. You need your government to fund it. So some commentators have said that our decision to reduce the World Cup size was based on cost. Absolutely not true. It's based on our strategic goal of increasing the number of potential host countries. We cannot, you know the history of rugby league, gentlemen, in the modern era since the World Cup has been a one tournament competition, starting in 95. England's the host, England's the host, Australia's the host, England's the host, Australia, England, Australia. That is a paradigm that needs to be broken. So by reducing the World Cup, we reduce the cost base and we increase the number of countries that can host the World Cup. If we split the World Cups over multiple different years, we've got this calendar of multiple assets that are coming 3 years out of every 4. We've got all good competitions like the World Series that will be added to that will over time become a saleable asset. And by doing that, we increase the likelihood of gaining sponsors, gaining broadcast partners, increasing the revenue, and that gives us the opportunity to do what we are supposed to do. And the IRL is not here to put on international matches. The IRL is here to grow the game globally. And that goes back to some of those metrics that we discussed earlier. More players, more clubs, more competitions, more democracy, more plurality, more government funding, more visitors, more fans, and that will lead to success in the end. So we're very confident about the new plan. We've got a critical couple of months ahead of us. February the 18th is the D-Day for the tenderers to submit their bids for World Cups 28, 29 and 30. But already we've got some stability with the 26 World Cup and our new commercial manager. We're deep into our commercial strategy to get commercial partners and broadcast partners, which will increase our revenue.
I tried to ask Ramon Safi a few weeks ago how are Kenya and South Africa bidding, like how what do those bids entail? And he sort of go, oh well, it's in the process. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, absolutely.
On those shop bids?
No, it's a competitive process. We get midterm reports. We've had one midterm report from all of the tenderers. Second midterm report is in October this month, next week, in fact. But it's again, the whole process is, I think, a good example of how the IRL is different today than it was a few years ago. I think the bid document for the 2021 World Cup was 1,200 words or something. The bid document we put together for World Cups 26 to 30 was over 20,000 words. Very serious document for serious organisations. So we need to do that. We need to move ourselves into a really serious footing so we become an established, accepted member of the sporting community. Because International Rugby League with small letters has got such potential. We all know that, but we need to start doing things correctly, which we have done, to be able to maximise the opportunities that are there for us.
Yeah, I fully agree, and very well said. You can't even pass a uni exam with 1,200 words, but 20,000, that's where the details are at. So really, really good to hear. I actually have a question that I've been curious about for quite some time now. It may seem a basic question, but perhaps you can clear it up. From a financial standpoint, is there a IRL sort of office or sort of accounting section in Sydney and the UK, or what's the structure like there?
Yeah, we've got the IRL is a group. So we've got 2 companies. One we call Ozco because it's our Australian company, and one we call UKCo because it's our English company. So the main trading company at the moment, based on more advantageous corporation tax, is the English company. So our formal address that we'll use on correspondence is the London office. But there's no one sitting in that office. It's just an address. But our finance manager is based in England. We got staff in Australia. I'm in France, so we don't need to have a physical office.
Danny, you've got Peter Volandis and Andrew Abdo on your board, and the chair is called Troy Grant. How much influence does the NRL/Australian Rugby League have on the international game?
Oh, huge. Yeah. Look, historically, Australia has been one of the most, if not the most important country in the game's international growth. And if you put IRL to one side, look at what the current ARLC administration is doing with the Pacific strategy. That's, at its heart, a capacity building project, which has got loads of byproduct advantages for the NRL and ARLC, but at its heart, it's a capacity building project that will leave its participant nations in a much better position off the field through their administrations. Peter and Andrew joined our board in December 22, and it's been a really interesting period with those two on the board. They're both internationalists at their heart. Peter grew up supporting the Kangaroos, and they want to see the IRL become something of great importance and great strength. I can say, without giving away any secrets, that the pair of them have made decisions as IRL directors that are firmly in IRL's interests rather than ARLC's interest. And that's their legal duty as IRL directors when they're sitting around our boardroom table. But it's also a mindset that is emblematic of what they've brought to the organisation. And we are a sport with 58 members, 5 of which have got reserves. The rest of them haven't got reserves, financial capacity. We must be a collective. If we are splintered, if we have factions, we are not going to be able to achieve our mission. So having our big nations, we call them the high capacity members, the 5 big members, having those pulling in the IRL direction and understanding that they've got a huge part to play in our success, because our success means the game's success, is evident to all of them. And all of your listeners can be reassured. They're not only Peter and Andrew's influence, but also Sandis Tucker, who's the longest serving president, chair of PNG, RFL, Greg Peters, who sits on our board currently from New Zealand Rugby League, Simon Johnson and Rodri Jones from the RFL. All of those people, when they're around our table, they've got no national allegiance. They are there as IRL directors to represent the interests of our company and our movement, and all of them do that.
Brilliant. Love to hear that. Pure curiosity, and I'm sure there's sort of annual reports available, etc. But perhaps you can save me time. Who are number 4 and 5 in the Big 5?
Well, in terms of, and this is another thing I like to tell our members, like when we talk about national championships, it's not a secret and not a coincidence that the richest country in rugby league has got the most players, and the second richest country has got the second most players, and the third richest country, so the second is obviously England, the third, New Zealand, has got the third highest number of registered players. PNG's probably got a load more unregistered, but registered players in New Zealand. And it's not a surprise, gentlemen, that the fourth richest country has got the fourth highest number of registered players, PNG, and the fifth is France. So those 5 countries, all of them have got over 10,000 registered players. And then there's quite a big gap, I guess, to Fiji and Wales, all of whom are making great progress. But those high capacity members have got an outsized influence on not what we do in terms of our strategic or operational output, but in terms of them being part of our family of rugby league national federations and accepting that they're an equal part of our family of nations.
And they both have genuinely decent sized populations with long-term rugby league presence in their cultural psyche without being critical, because I love what Tonga, Samoa, even Fiji, or Fiji's got about 1 million people, but there's a ceiling that's pretty low outside of the diaspora for small Pacific islands, but the ceiling is very high in PNG, where there's estimated to be as much as 17 million people. And you know, if we can get things going in France, as you touched on earlier.
Oh, yeah. I mean, France is one of the, I always will mix it up and it probably interchanges year by year, but there are 2 massive sports economies in Europe, England or Britain and France. France has got an unregulated top 14 rugby union competition. The amount of euros that constitute the French sports economy, massive. And for us as a sport, that's the obvious, and this is accepted in a part of our plans. It's accepted that France is the elephant in the room, and it can unlock a lot of that potential and a lot of that growth through some strategic successes from them around Toulouse and around the growth of the game there. But you mentioned, Keith, Samoa and Tonga, and I think both of those countries got approximately 120,000 inhabitants. But yes, they do have deep rugby league cultures, and they are being helped by the Pacific strategy to get opportunities on and off the field for locals to administer rugby league and be involved in a professional setup. But they also obviously offer us as a sport an outsized asset in terms of what they bring to our assets like the World Cup. And we, all of us today, are in the middle of it, so it's maybe difficult to see, but we're in the strongest period of competitiveness in rugby league history. And that's only going to grow. And you've seen the squad's named for Pacific Championship. Yes. World Cup 26, we hope is going to have squads as close as possible to full strength. As an elite rugby league competition, I struggle to think of anything that's going to be more exciting than that.
Yeah, me too. Bindingly, just to think about. Like I can't I have to ask this question because every international fan anyway has been thinking this for a number of decades. There's been criticism that NRL's always had way too much influence over the international schedule and player availability. What are your thoughts on that?
The NRL is competition and it's a part of the Australian Rugby League Commission. It has got a huge percentage of the players that make up a large number of our elite organisations. My understanding that those players are contractually obligated to play in representative football. The RLPA and the RLC have obviously negotiated the collective bargaining agreement to try and delineate the end of the domestic season with a clear international window, and then an unbroken period of holiday until returning to pre-season training for the subsequent season. So those are agreements that are in place for the health of the players and for the long-term durability of the ARLC's number one product, which is the NRL competition, and its biggest asset, which are the players. So without those and without due consideration to player health and rest, then none of us have got a product. I go back to the answer I gave a few moments ago, which is that the ARLC leadership now are completely committed to the international game. You might have seen Peter Vlandis and Mal Meninga in their press conference a couple of days ago or yesterday, where it was clear, like, the green and gold shirt is the pinnacle of the sport in Australia. And for rugby league administrators who need to grow and respect state of origin, that's a hell of a statement. But it's true. It's true. Any objective person would say that the best players are picked for the national team. And there is only one team in Australia that is going to appeal to all of the nation, and that is the national team. So yes, they've got an influence because they're by far the biggest country, but they should have an influence because they've shown the rest of the rugby league world what it takes to make a very, very successful product and business. So if they were more unilateral in their thinking and more dismissive of the IRL, then we'd feel it, but that's not the case.
Just taking a different tack for a little while, Danny, your role, Secretary General of the IRL, how would you describe your job?
Well, it's, as I said, fascinating and a privilege. It's effectively the head of the administration, so chief exec, and it's called Secretary General at the moment because it's a term that is more well known to the majority of the international sporting world. So my job is to execute the instructions of the board. We've got a very hands-on board that meets 6 times a year. So all of the plans and processes that they, or strategic objectives that they have set, it's up to me and my team to implement those plans. I also am involved in a number of initiatives that we, as the management, propose to the board. So there's a two-way sharing of ideas, and I deal with my staff in all areas of operations, so we can take the ideas that the board set and take the ideas that the board have approved that we've proposed and make them reality. That means dealing with a lot of our members on a daily basis and dealing with more far-reaching strategic projects as well. It's all encompassing.
International scheduling seems to be still a little bit last minute at times compared to, say, rugby union, who announces tours and matches years ahead. Have you got any thoughts on why this is the case?
Yeah, I think there was, post Super League war, there was a lull in the international planning agenda. Then you had a very unsuccessful World Cup in 2000 that prompted a delay of 8 years until the next World Cup. So that was a real period of recovery for the international game. We, as an organisation, had our first staff member in 2015. David Collier was hired as the organisation's first chief executive. And then since then, we've built up our administration. There's a clear realization now that post-COVID as well, and going back to what I was saying about long-term broadcast and commercial partners, we need content that is going to appear on the calendar for years to come. And that's why we broke up the World Cups, to make sure that we had content that currently should be until 2030. You'll know from the announcements we made in 2023 that there are a number of big ticket traditional tours. The Ashes is returning, but with an added bonus of having a women's Ashes as well next year, Kiwi Tour in 27, Kangaroo Tour in 28. So we do have the first 5 years of a calendar in place. Where we'd like to see more long-term planning is actually from the lower tier nations, where we still see matches that are organised a bit late, and we'd like to start having more robust conversations with our members about the strategic importance of those matches, rather than just playing a match for a match's sake. What is the purpose of that in your strategy? And we've got that opportunity in one of the functions that we introduced in 2019, which had been one of the European Federation's functions since 2013, I think. We introduced it into the IRL, was the annual membership audit. And part of that is each member nation has to submit their strategy. And we will then, and this is going to start more earnestly next year when we've got a bit more time, because now we're a bit more stable, we will then engage with those members to really deep dive into those strategies and understand with them how they're going to achieve their strategic objectives and how we can assist them. So part of that is long-term planning, but you'll see the evidence that we've already got multiple events, multiple big ticket items that are on the calendar, and which are part of our commercial portfolio that we're now currently going to be using with potential sponsors and broadcasters.
I've got a media and communications question, Danny, because that's my thing. From the IRL and ERL, I see things like pre- and post-match media releases, and occasionally we may see a story if there's an NRL connection or something like that. Do you think the IRL and ERL could do more to promote stories on the administrators, coaches and players at the coalface doing the good work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll let ERL speak for ERL, but yeah, IRL, we've got a very capable media manager, Brad Walter. He's not with us full time. You'll both know, your listeners will know, that he is a full-time employee of ARLC. So Brad, again, is an internationalist at heart. And yeah, I mean, we can always do more. As our resources grow, we'll be able to invest more in the communication space.
Nice. Which countries do you expect to emerge and thrive in the next 5 to 10 years?
Oh, that's a great question. If we talk about emerging markets, I think we've got genuine emerging markets in Africa and the Americas. We are still, at the vast majority of our members, a very grassroots driven organisation. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that countries are doing the right thing by themselves to give them the most stability and opportunity to grow in the future. And I would say that the third most important document after our statutes and operational rules is the membership policy. So the current membership policy was introduced in 2019, and it's got about 6 different areas on and off the field that nations have to aspire to. And if they do that, they should be in a stronger position to grow. To answer your question directly, we've seen governance reform recently in the USA. That was a 2.5-year project that I was heavily involved in with colleagues. We've seen governance reform in Tonga, which has resulted in a new national federation after 4 years in the wilderness. So I see those 2 countries as having great potential to grow. I think Canada in North America, it's growing its participation footprint. I think South Africa is a really interesting one. South Africa, as you know, has been a rugby league country since the 50s, but it's always been isolated, and it's always had to play or contend with bigger brothers, England, Australia, and it wasn't really in their orbit. I think South Africa now is playing the role that it is destined to play as the leader in Africa. And it's up to us to help South African Rugby League, which has got more capacity at the moment than its African brothers, to be able to play that leadership role. In addition to them, we've got very forward-thinking, commercially minded organisations in Kenya. Ghana's doing amazing things. If you look at Ghana Rugby League social media, they're doing fantastic things on and off the field all the time. And for us, it's not just about growth. It's got to be stability. They've got to have the capacity to take advantage of opportunities and weather the bad times as well. So, and I've been a victim of this myself as an administrator. When things are going really, really well in a particular country, and you kind of notice that they may be not doing fundamental things right, it's very difficult to put the brakes on and say, hang on a minute, yes, you're growing exponentially, but you haven't done this particular governance thing in accordance with your constitution, so that's going to lead to problems later. Now, through my experiences and my utter dedication to good governance in practice, those same mistakes from our perspective aren't being made anymore. We're much more confident about reining in national federations that maybe are growing a bit too fast. And it's they're sovereign organisations. They do what they want. We can only advise them, but we can help them understand that if they continue down a particular route, then things might go wrong. And Stuart, you're here. Greece was a great example of that over many, many years, where the previous administration was going wrong and we were able to intervene and eventually get to a more satisfactory outcome. So there's loads of great work happening in the rugby league world. My ambition, my goal is that that great work turns not into ephemeral success, but long-term, durable national federations that are part of their own country's legal sporting framework. And so they can grow incrementally, locally, at their own pace, and have the capacity to withstand internal and external pressures, of which there are loads doing what we do.
Danny, my next question, I think you've answered it in a lot of ways, was about splitting the World Cups up and reducing the size of the number of teams. But just for developing nations, I was lucky enough, obviously, to do the media for the Greek team last World Cup and saw what it meant to a country like Greece to be in a World Cup. Do you think these decisions are hurting the developing nations, or how can it benefit them?
The reduction of the World Cups, you mean?
Yeah.
Absolutely does not hurt them. We've got to be realistic as a sport. Look at the Men's World Cup in England. 50% of the group games were 28-point or more score margins, all the way up to 80 points. That is not helping anyone in the long run. That is not an attractive product. There are two schools of thought about a World Cup. It's a festival of the sport, or it is a real commercial driver. We have absolutely looked and examined what we've done in the past, and we are using the World Cup now as an elite commercial driver. It is going to be a competitive tournament. Wheelchair, women and men's tournaments will all be competitive and really attractive to sponsors. We also have, for the festival and for the development guys, something that I think is quite unique in world sport, in the World Series, not the name, but the concept. For people, of which there are numerous, who love the idea of how the sport is developing region per region, the World Series is going to pit all of our 4 operational regions against each other, and the best team will progress. And that is going to see opportunities, the same amount of opportunities for developing, and I don't like using the term developing nations because everyone's a developing nation, but the smaller nations, they've all got that opportunity. If they meet the eligibility criteria through the membership policy, they've all got the same opportunities that they had. I maintain, and I respect different people's opinion on this, and I know that a lot of people will say, yeah, but when we had a 16-team World Cup, that was more opportunity. The facts do not bear that up. The empirical evidence of we can get more national teams if we want, and split the number of players up and use heritage players and get any number of national teams that want in the World Cup. That is not growing the sport. I go back to our fundamental objective. Our number one constitutional article is grow the sport. And we have taken that decision in 23. How best we do that is through through our commercial activity, increasing revenue, investing back into the sport, into the members. So when members start to see that their grants from us, for example, are increasing, then they'll start to see that the strategy is working. This year is the first time ever that IRL as an organisation, would you believe, is investing in technical education. So we've got a number of technical education projects happening. We're supporting the Australian wheelchair tour to New Zealand. That's another wheelchair rugby league nation. We're supporting coach and match official education in the Cook Islands. They're not a part of the ARLC's Pacific strategy, so that's where IRL can plug itself in. And we're supporting a number of match official and coaching education projects in African countries, trying to help them grow to bridge the gap from affiliate to full member. We've also got a proposal with the board that hopefully will get approved, is for a small discretionary fund for affiliate members to, again, bridge that gap to full membership. So the opportunities for national federations to participate in the World Cup are there. Is the road harder? Yeah, objectively it is, but it should be. It should be. You saw, I know in my time that when certain nations qualify for a World Cup, there's no emotion. There's no emotion. It was expected. You know, they knew they were going to get to a World Cup. We want to get to a position where qualifying for a World Cup means something. And there are far more meaningful matches now in the calendar than there were a few years ago. And think about that time when the World Series qualifies a men's team or a women's team who didn't expect to get there. That's that type of emotional friction and spark that we would all associate with more established World Cup qualifications in football, for example. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're striving towards. So I personally, from a personal fan perspective and a professional perspective, reject the notion that the opportunities for smaller nations has been reduced. On the contrary, we're doing what we're doing to help them.
Something that would help rugby league as a sport immensely would be to become an Olympic sport, even if it's just as an exhibition sport. Amongst other things, it helps around the world with funding. Is there any chance rugby league could be featuring at the 2032 Brisbane Olympics?
Unfortunately, there is no chance of that occurring. My colleagues who are resident in Australia have got very good contacts with the Olympic Committee. They did lobby on behalf of the sport and were told that that is not possible. The sport program itself is set quite a long time in advance. And while there are opportunities for demonstration sports, rugby league at the moment is not a sport that is recognised by the Olympics. And I've mentioned a couple of times in this interview that we as a sport need to do more to become an accepted part of the international community. The biggest metric of achieving that is getting IOC recognition. And it's important to differentiate between IOC recognition and being a part of the Olympic Games themselves. So we joined GACE, which was the now defunct Global Association of International Sports Federations, in 2018. That was the umbrella group internationally for Olympic and non-Olympic sports. We've now been told that internationally we need to join AIMS, which is an Olympic organisation of association of, I think it's independent member sports. And through AIMS, the president of whom is a big rugby league fan, I digress, we then would join the IOC and we'd become a member of what's called ARISF, which is the Association of Recognised International Sports Federations, which is a long way of saying all the sports that the Olympic movement recognises but are not part of the Games programme. So once we get ARISF recognition, that should unlock the opportunity for many of our members to engage with their NOCs at a local level and hopefully get more access to facilities, at least, if not funding. So there are great opportunities that we can have through IOC affiliation that don't mean that we're a part of the Games themselves.
Can you explain what being a full IRL member entails? For example, the benefits, the criteria to become one, etc.
Yeah, the benefits are that you get to vote in a General Assembly. You have access to discretionary annual grant funding, which we give out based on a framework of key performance indicators. So you'll get a guaranteed amount, and then you'll get additional amounts for hitting certain marks around youth development and domestic championship and technical development. The benefits are that you get to participate in a men's World Cup in the qualifying competition. One of the decisions we made in 23 was that full membership was the obligatory standard for men's World Cup participation. Your duties are that you've got to participate in the World Cup cycle. You've got to maintain your level of membership, which means every year having a minimum number of clubs involved in your national championship. Over time, as we see the sport grow, we'll look to incrementally increase those minimum standards, which will mean that the growth of the sport is happening. And you'll have seen that when countries are regularly in breach of those rules, that they can be recategorized to a different level, which happened earlier this year with Ireland, Scotland, Lebanon, Russia, and one other maybe.
I was quite shocked to see Ireland and Scotland. Scotland's been stagnant for a long time, but maybe this is what they needed. That sort of like almost like a performance improvement plan.
Absolutely, it is. Scotland and Ireland have been in every modern World Cup. They've been in more World Cups than they've got clubs, and that's not a criticism. That is the fact, and it is really important if the game is going to grow for more Irish people, more Scottish people to be regularly involved in a longer period of the year with the sport in their countries. And they are, I repeat, they are sovereign countries. They can implement strategies that they think are best for rugby league in their countries. Where that will clash is probably the wrong word, but where that doesn't marry with our plan, we've got a membership policy that has got certain criteria that we think, if met, means that your national federation is more stable with a higher capacity. And the Irish and the Scots understand that. They both accepted their recategorisation, and they both see it as an opportunity for growth now. And that is what they need to do. They need to focus on towns and villages and cities who want to have rugby league clubs and work with growing that national competition. Go back to what I was saying earlier about the 5 strongest countries, the 5 richest countries have got the most players. It's not a coincidence. You've got to grow the local product for them to have any traction. Appearing at a World Cup once every 4 years doesn't mean stability or growth.
I actually wholeheartedly agree with that. If I can briefly take us back to Greece, though, it was obviously a difficult time before the sport was given government recognition. How was it for you as head of the European Rugby League at the time?
Well, first of all, I want to reiterate what you two said about George Stylianos. He was instrumental. He wasn't alone. There were a lot of like-minded people, but he was instrumental in leading the fight back against corruption, naked corruption in Greek Rugby League. I would say, without sounding too dramatic, that without the intervention of George and his group, who saw that things were going wrong within Greek Rugby League, and they were all a part of Greek Rugby League, then we were maybe a year away from losing Greek Rugby League. And what do I mean by that? I mean that it would have still continued, but it would have been so in the power of a corrupt group that it would have been increasingly difficult to extricate ourselves, because they would have had constitutional means to maintain their grip on the sport. So the intervention, and it's been a long time, so was it 2015? Around 2015, that's what we received a complaint about a whistleblowing complaint from within Greece saying, look, these are corrupt practices, please investigate. That triggered a very long period of investigation from IRL, RLEF at the time. That also led to a surprise visit to Greece by the aforementioned David Collier and another colleague of ours, Jovan Vujosevic, without anyone in Greece knowing. And it led to, and again, I'll get the year wrong, but 2017, I think it was. 2017, it led to the members of RLEF expelling Greek Rugby League for clearly corrupt practices. And then in early 2018, we admitted a new member, the Greek Rugby League Association, and that has now, the success story before the last World Cup, turned into a federation. And we should also thank the diplomatic efforts of the British and Australian governments in achieving that. That diplomatic pressure right at the heart of the French polity, the Greek polity was really, really important to achieving that level. So it was that's the type of unseen thing that we do, Keith. We're heavily involved in governance disputes and conversations all the time to make sure that type of thing doesn't happen again, and to insulate our members against that type of unwanted influence in the future. But it's a constant problem in sport, and it'll happen again.
Danny, I'm quickly building a tradition with each podcast of asking a non-rugby league question, basically because I love travel and food. So my question to you, Danny, is where's your favourite cuisine? Is it London, Lebanon, or the south of France?
Definitely not London. You can't beat Lebanese food. But I'm a massive foodie as well. So very difficult question to answer. Depends what mood you're in, I guess. But the last time I had a really good Lebanese meal was in Toulouse when I was there for the England-France international in the middle of Toulouse. So I missed it from my days in Beirut. But yeah, I'll move London out and stick to south of France and Lebanon.
Okay, so it's a draw. Lebanon and France a draw.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good.
Well, we are actually out of questions. This has been an incredible honour to be able to interview you. Have you got anything to add for our listeners?
No, I just think we're in a generally good place. I think what we've done from 23 in terms of the commercial future is a sea change in what this organisation and what the sport has done internationally for decades before it. The results of that, the fruits of that, aren't going to happen overnight. The whole process of writing the ITT documents, the invitation to tender documents, getting the bids prepared, getting bids submitted, the amount of work that went in from the Australian Rugby League in putting a bid together for the 2026 World Cup based on the ITT all of that takes time. I think the next big point in my calendar is February. If we get to a position where we've got some really attractive bids for World Cups 28, 29 and 30, then I think that will provide the foundation of the next 10, 20 years of unprecedented growth at a grassroots level. And the final point I'll make is reiterate why we are here. We are here to grow the game, and we'll do that by direct and indirect investment in our members. So the more successful IRL is, the more direct investment we're going to put in our members through cash grants, and the more indirect investment through competition, supporting our competitions, making it increasingly attractive offers to those member nations, and also doing projects like technical education. Like we had the first ever technical education budget this year. Hopefully that doubles next year, which will allow IRL to get front and centre present in our member nations. I think that's really important that we've got a presence there. We go out to visit them, look them in the eye, meet all of the people that are involved in it, see the conditions they're working in, get that tactile relationship between the IF, which most of the time is at the end of a phone or a computer screen, and getting our presence in those countries as well and giving them as much encouragement as they need. So I think the future's bright. very exciting, and full respect to all of the people who are in our national federations who are pushing the sport's boundaries, most of the time thanklessly, every day. So thanks for your time, gents.
Thanks for listening to Everything Rugby League. If you like this episode, give the show a follow and leave a review. For more news and insights, follow us on Facebook or head to everythingrugbyleague.com.